On a stormy November night in 1978, two experienced divers descended into the dark waters of the North Sea. Their routine mission quickly turned into a desperate fight for survival. But what caused this diving operation to go so horribly wrong? How did these skilled professionals end up trapped in a nightmare scenario 300 feet below the surface? And what can we learn from this tragic event to prevent future underwater disasters? A risky dive in harsh conditions. Our story begins on November 26, 1978. The diving support vessel, Star Canopus, was positioned next to the Barrel Alpha oil platform in the East Shetland Basin of the North Sea. This area is known for its harsh conditions, especially during winter months. But on this particular night, the crew of the Star Canopus was about to face a perfect storm of challenges. At the heart of our tale are two experienced commercial divers, 25-year-old Lothar Michael Ward and 28-year-old Gerard Anthony Tony Prangley. These weren't your average weekend scuba enthusiasts. Ward and Prangley were highly trained professionals, used to working in some of the most demanding underwater environments on Earth. Their mission on that night? To connect a 6-inch flow line to a riser flange protruding from the side of the Barrel Alpha platform. It was a routine job, but one that required precision and skill at a depth of over 300 feet. Now, you might be wondering why anyone would be diving in the North Sea in late November. Well, here's the thing. Normally, diving operations in this area would be halted during the winter, but 1978 had seen a decline in oil production, and work had fallen behind schedule. Oil companies like Mobil were eager to catch up, even if it meant pushing the limits of safe diving conditions. As the Star Canopus prepared for the dive, the weather was a major concern. Earlier that evening, forecasts had predicted 40-knot wind gusts. These predictions proved accurate, with strong squalls hitting the ship around 8:30 p.m. and again just before 11 p.m. Each time, the powerful winds blew the Star Canopus off its position. Despite these warning signs, when the shift changed at midnight, the weather had temporarily calmed. The new dive supervisor, Robert Kelly, was told that conditions were reasonable to dive, but the forecast still warned of worsening conditions later in the day, with wind speeds potentially gusting up to 35 knots. Here's where things get interesting. The Star Canopus was a state-of-the-art vessel, just a year old at the time. It used a dynamic positioning system to stay in place. Think of it as a high-tech autopilot for ships. But even this advanced system had its limits. If winds hit the ship's side at more than 18 to 20 knots, it would struggle to maintain position. As Kelly prepared to launch the dive, he noticed the wind speed fluctuating between 15 and 20 knots. Looking out across the sea, he could see the imposing silhouette of another platform nearby. The Haken Magnus, a Norwegian semi-submersible with massive anchor chains extending into the water. Despite the challenging conditions, Kelly made the fateful decision to proceed with the dive. At 2:40 a.m., he launched the diving bell with Ward and Prangley inside. Little did they know, they were about to descend into a situation that would push their skills and their luck to the absolute limit. The dive begins. A routine operation turns dangerous. As the diving bell carrying Ward and Prangley descended into the inky blackness of the North Sea, the mood on the Star Canopus was one of cautious optimism. Despite the earlier weather concerns, conditions seemed to have stabilized. But in the unpredictable world of offshore diving, things can change in an instant. At 3:12 a.m., Ward exited the diving bell and made his way to the concrete wall of the Barrel Alpha platform. His task was to locate the pipe flange where they needed to connect the flow line. But just as he found it, Supervisor Kelly's voice crackled over the radio, ordering him back to the bell due to deteriorating conditions on the surface. For the next 40 minutes, Ward and Prangley waited in the bell, suspended in the cold, dark water. Then, at 4 a.m., they got the all clear. The weather had settled again, and it was time to get back to work. Ward once again left the relative safety of the bell and swam to the pipe flange. As he began the work of attaching the flow line, everything seemed to be going according to plan. On the surface, the wind speed indicator was showing a 15 to 20 knot headwind, close to the ship's operational limits, but still manageable. For nearly 2 hours, Ward worked steadily, with Prangley monitoring his progress from inside the bell. At 5:45 a.m., the situation changed dramatically. Just as the weather forecast had predicted, the wind suddenly shifted direction. But what no one had anticipated was the sheer force of this change. In a matter of moments, the wind went from a 15 to 20 knot headwind to a 40 knot broadside gale, slamming into the star Canopus with tremendous force. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The ship was blown sideways, crashing into the nearby Haken Magnus platform. The star Canopus's mast slammed into a crossbeam of the Magnus, snapping it in two with a sickening crack. On the bridge, Captain Roy Forsyth realized they were in serious trouble. He quickly switched off the dynamic positioning system and began maneuvering the ship manually, desperately trying to avoid grounding on the massive underwater pontoons of the Magnus. As alarms blared across the ship, Forsyth hit the dive abort button and called down to the dive control room. His message was clear and urgent: get the divers back immediately. In the dive control room, Supervisor Kelly sprang into action. He radioed down to Ward, ordering him to stop work and return to the bell. As Ward swam back, Prangley began the process of retrieving the dive partner's umbilical, the lifeline that provided air, communications, and warm water to the diver. But as Prangley pulled, he encountered a problem. The umbilical was snagged on something outside the bell. Without all of Ward's umbilical inside, they couldn't seal the hatch, and without a sealed hatch, they couldn't begin their ascent to safety. As the situation grew more desperate, Prangley suggested diving out to free the umbilical. But Kelly, aware of the dangers above, vetoed this idea. Instead, he ordered the divers to cut the umbilical and seal the hatch as quickly as possible. As Ward and Prangley struggled to follow these instructions, their diving bell was being tossed violently in the turbulent waters. Suddenly, it slammed hard into the Barrel Alpha platform, shocking the divers inside. Despite this jarring impact, they managed to cut the umbilical and seal the hatch. With the bell finally secured, Kelly began the process of retracting it back to the surface. As they ascended, Prangley called out their depth every 10 meters, 50 meters, 40 meters, 30 meters. Then, without warning, Prangley jumped to his feet, waving his arms frantically. "All stop," he shouted. The ascent halted, and an eerie silence fell over the comm system as Prangley seemed to be listening intently to something. From his position in the control room, Kelly could see that something was terribly wrong. The umbilical and guide wires for the diving bell weren't hanging straight down as they should have been. Instead, they were angled sharply towards the bow of the ship. The pulley supporting these vital lines was shaking violently. In the next horrifying moment, everything went wrong at once. The video feed from the bell cut out, plunging Kelly into darkness. At the same time, a sickening snap echoed through the ship as the star Canopus, blown off course by the relentless wind, collided with one of the massive anchor chains of the Haken Magnus. In that instant, all connections to the diving bell were severed. The main lift wire, the life support umbilical, and the guide wire recovery system. Ward and Prangley, trapped inside their metal cocoon, began plummeting towards the seabed 294 feet below. As the bell fell, the two divers could do nothing but brace for impact, hoping against hope that their fragile shelter would protect them from the crushing pressure of the deep. Trapped in the depths, a race against time. The impact, when it came, was violent but not immediately fatal. Ward and Prangley found themselves alive but in a nightmarish situation. Their diving bell, designed to be a safe haven in the unforgiving underwater environment, had become a cold, dark prison on the seafloor of the North Sea. The first and most immediate threat was the cold. With their connection to the surface severed, the warm water supply that usually kept the bell at a comfortable temperature was gone. The frigid North Sea water, hovering just above freezing, began to leach away their body heat through the metal walls of the bell. But the cold wasn't their only problem. The bell's air supply, while sufficient for a normal dive, was now a ticking clock counting down to suffocation. Every breath they took brought them closer to the moment when the oxygen would run out. In a situation like this, standard procedure would be to release the bell's drop weight, allowing it to float back to the surface. But Ward and Prangley quickly discovered a horrifying fact. They couldn't release the weight. It was secured to the bell's frame with a set of external, secondary locking pins that they couldn't reach from inside. Under normal circumstances, a diver would be able to exit the bell and manually release these pins. But the star Canopus's bell lacked a crucial safety feature: a stage to keep the bottom hatch clear of the seabed. Without this, the bell had settled directly onto the muddy bottom, effectively sealing Ward and Prangley inside. To make matters worse, the bell wasn't equipped with some of the safety features that might have aided in their rescue. There was no strobe flasher to help rescue divers locate them in the depths. The bell's transponder, which could have sent out a locator signal, had been removed some time before the dive and never replaced. As the reality of their situation sank in, Ward and Prangley were faced with a grim truth. Their only hope for survival lay in a swift rescue from above, but they had no way of knowing what was happening on the surface, or if anyone even knew where to look for them. Meanwhile, on the storm-tossed surface, the crew of the star Canopus was grappling with the enormity of what had just happened. They knew that every minute counted in the race to save Ward and Prangley, but the same fierce weather that had caused the accident was now hampering rescue efforts. The winds that had pushed the star Canopus off course were still howling, making it extremely dangerous to launch any kind of rescue operation. The crew faced an agonizing dilemma: wait for the storm to subside and risk the lives of the trapped divers, or attempt a rescue in these treacherous conditions and potentially lose even more lives. As the hours ticked by, the situation in the bell was growing dire. The temperature inside was plummeting, and Ward and Prangley huddled together, trying to conserve what little body heat they had left. They knew that hypothermia was their greatest enemy now, slowly but surely sapping their strength and clouding their minds. In these dark hours, we can only imagine the thoughts that must have run through their minds. Did they think about their families, their loved ones? Did they hold out hope for rescue, or did they realize that their chances were growing slimmer with each passing minute? Back on the surface, a desperate plan was taking shape. 3 rescue vessels, Intersub 4, Tender Carrier, and Uncle John, had been called in to assist with the search and rescue operation. But the storm was still raging, making any rescue attempt incredibly risky. For 13 long, agonizing hours, the battle against time and nature continued. The rescue teams fought against the wind and waves, searching desperately for any sign of the lost diving bell. Without a locator beacon, finding a small metal pod in the vast expanse of the North Sea was like looking for a needle in a haystack, in the dark, during a hurricane. Finally, after what must have seemed like an eternity to those involved, the storm began to subside. As soon as it was safe to do so, rescue divers plunged into the churning waters, determined to find their missing colleagues. When they finally located the bell and managed to attach a line to it, the moment of truth had arrived. As they began to lift the bell from the seafloor, everyone held their breath, hoping against hope for a miracle. But as the bell broke the surface, the grim reality became clear. The body of Tony Prangley fell from the open bottom hatch, floating lifelessly to the surface. Inside the bell, they found Michael Ward, also deceased. The official cause of death for Michael Ward was listed as hypothermia. Tony Prangley, it seemed, had succumbed to drowning, likely in a desperate final attempt to escape the freezing bell. The Star Canopus diving incident sent shockwaves through the offshore diving community. It highlighted the extreme dangers faced by commercial divers and the sometimes thin line between routine operations and disaster. In the years following this tragedy, significant changes were made to improve safety standards in North Sea diving operations. New regulations were put in place, equipment was improved, and procedures were tightened. Today, saturation diving deaths in the North Sea have steadily decreased, thanks in large part to the lessons learned from incidents like the Star Canopus incident. But for those who remember that fateful day in November 1978, the memory of Michael Ward and Tony Prangley serves as a reminder of the risks and sacrifices made by those who work beneath the waves. Make sure to subscribe for more tragic cave diving stories like this one. Until next time.